東京都医師会の尾崎でございますけれども、特別講演の座長をさせていただきます。特別講演ではもう2年半切ってしまいましたけれども、東京オリンピック・パラリンピックが私どもでも開催されるわけですけれども、今回はロンドンとリオの経験から学ぶことを目的しまして、2名の先生にご講演をいただきたいと思います。まず、大規模イベントと地球規模健康危機管理に関する WHO 協力センター、ブライアン・マクロスキー英勲爵士にお願いしたいと思います。マクロスキー英勲爵士はロンドンスクール・オブ・ハイジーン・アンド・トロピカル・メディスンの教授を務められ、オリンピック・パラリンピックにおいて2012年のロンドンでは公共衛生サービスチームを指揮、2016年リオでは公衆衛生顧問を務められました。2013年、公衆衛生分野における功績により英国王室から爵位を授与されております。本日はオリンピック・パラリンピック準備における保健問題、価値はあるのか、2012年ロンドンからの教訓と題しましてご講演をいただきます。それではマクロスキー英勲爵士、よろしくお願いします。Please.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming back from your lunch to listen to me. I shall try not to keep you awake. It's really good to be back in Tokyo again, so I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me here. I'm going to talk a bit about what London 2012 did for the Olympics and what we learned from it and what we gained from it. And I suppose the question is, why am I talking about the Olympics in an environment where we've been talking about universal health coverage all morning? And I think I would argue that a city hosting Olympic Games, it's an opportunity to look at how you deliver healthcare services and health services and public health and see what you can do differently because of the Games. A few years ago, I was involved in helping WHO write a book on the key considerations for the public health issues in Olympic Games, or mass gatherings in general. I just want to highlight some of the chapters in that because they're important themes. And being an epidemiologist, I start with the definition, the usual World Health Organization definition of a mass gathering is a gathering of people in sufficient numbers that it potentially threatens the health system of the host city or the host country. And when we look at that, there are a whole range of mass gatherings that we get involved in. There are the Olympics, obviously, but there's also mass gatherings such as the Hajj pilgrimage that happens in Saudi Arabia every year. There are music festivals. There are mass gatherings that happen in the same place every year, such as Glastonbury Festival. There are those that move around like the Olympics. And then there's mass gatherings that are not planned, such as recently the funeral of Nelson Mandela in South Africa, the funeral of the Pope, and very recently in Bangkok, the funeral of the late King. All of these mass gatherings have a slightly different context. And one of the key issues is to do a risk assessment early on to try and work out what it is that you think might happen and what might go wrong. But also then within that to look at the opportunities. And I say there are always opportunities to improve health services when you're doing a mass gathering. But like most opportunities, you have to reach out and grab them. One of the key issues around mass gatherings in general is the need for coordination and communication. And I had a meeting with the Tokyo Metropolitan Government yesterday talking about some of the issues for Tokyo 2020. And the key one for the next 2 years is how to improve communication and coordination between all the agencies that will be involved. Planning and surveillance is the core, working out what you want to do, the surveillance to work out what is happening, what might go wrong, what is going wrong, are all challenges to public health systems that don't normally have to work at the speed and intensity that they will have to do during your games here. There's also about what's called event medicine. Event medicine are the people who specialize in providing health and medical care at large events, whether they be concerts or Olympic Games, the people who provide the health care to the athletes, etc. And they're a different player in the field. and it's important to know how to work with them. But it's also important to note that one of the Olympic traditions is that athletes staying in the Olympic Village are provided with free dental care and free eye care. And that's been a long tradition of the Olympic movement. And it provides health care to people coming to the Games from countries where they cannot afford to access the service themselves, such as some of the African countries or, of course, the United States. But also in London 2012, one of the things we did in addition was to introduce free anonymous HIV testing, for example, for all the athletes. So again, athletes coming from countries where HIV still carries a bad stigma, where it is difficult to get tested in their home country, were able to do that in confidence in London. Then there's a dilemma between healthcare and public health. For obvious reasons, a lot of the planning focus for Olympic Games focuses on providing healthcare to the athletes and the Olympic family, trying to make sure the athletes are as fit as possible to compete and looking after them if any injuries or accidents happen. And very little attention often is given to the public health aspects of planning for Games. And that was one of the first challenges that we looked at in London, was how to change that and put an equal focus on public health. And that's an important part when it comes to talk about legacy. What do we leave behind after the Games? What do we pass on to other people? And one of those, which was referred to earlier on in one of our presentations this morning, is about how to get public health to become a health priority, a political priority. And the Games, or any mass gathering, is a good opportunity to do that. So 4 key challenges that face any mass gathering, but particularly the Olympic Games: politics, media, complexity, and new partners. Politics is always important. The Games, by the time they start, are a symbol of Japan's national reputation. And at that point, the political establishment, up to the very top, to the Prime Minister, will be concerned that they're delivered in a health and safe way, and they portray a good image of Japan. And because of that political interest, the tensions on the system get greater. But that's also an opportunity, that because of that interest politically, you can use that to help get what you want for public health and other services. Media are a huge issue for the Games. If you've been watching the Winter Games in Pyeongchang recently, you will see the huge publicity generated by the outbreak of norovirus that affected first the security guards and now some athletes. In London, we had over 20,000 media present in London during our Games. 10,000 of those were accredited to report on the sport and what was happening. 10,000 were there to report on what goes wrong. And they were walking around London trying to find things to talk about. And Rio had a similar experience over some of their issues. The Games are also hugely complex, between the transport issues to get people into Tokyo, around Tokyo, to make them happen safely, to get the athletes where they need to be, to get the visitors where they need to be, to teach visitors how to understand how to use the metro. A hugely complex organization. And then there's new partners, in particular the organizing committee of the Olympic Games, who effectively run the medical services inside the park and inside the venues, who are a completely different entity to the normal healthcare system delivered in the city. And you have to work out how to work with them and how to deal with these new partners. So the challenges we started thinking through very early on in London was, one, to get public health at the table, because as I say, most of the focus was on how to get health care, hospital care, ambulances organized. And we sat saying, no, actually there are public health issues, partly about communicable disease like norovirus and Zika and Rio, etc., but also about public health issues, about health promotion, about activity, about smoking. We set up very early on a steering committee and a coordination mechanism to bring together all these new partners, including the organizing committee, the Department of Health, Public Health England, and all the key players in the local authorities, so we could sit down and work through what we were trying to achieve, not just to deliver the Games, but to get the legacy afterwards. The next challenge is to look and review the capability and capacity. What can we do? Particularly when you look at the risk assessment, how will we know if any of those risks materialize, and what will we do about it? And then you have to start planning to fill the gaps, to put in the things that are missing to meet those risks. And that then becomes an opportunity as well. And as I'll show later, one of the things we did was to improve communicable disease surveillance in London, and all of those new systems that we put in place for the Games are still in place and are being used every day as part of our normal communicable disease system. But legacy will only happen if it's thought about very early on. And broadly, we're looking from London's perspective at 3 different ways in which we believe we've left a legacy from London 2012. I hesitate slightly saying that in front of people like Michael Marmot, because I can't give any evidence for what we achieved, and that's one of the challenges for these organizations. It's difficult to categorize and quantify and measure a legacy in this form. But there's legacy in terms of infrastructure, buildings or equipment that are left behind after the games. There's potential legacy in the terms of encouraging people to make better, healthy choices. And very importantly for us, there's a legacy across government in the UK of better cross-agency working in support of health policy. But looking first of all at some of the infrastructure issues. As I say, when we started planning for our games in a public health perspective, we realized that although we have very good communicable disease surveillance systems across the UK, they were not adequate for the demands of Olympic Games. And essentially, our standard policy was that we would do everything that we normally do in the UK, but we would have to do it faster, and we would have to start action at a lower threshold than we would on a normal event. And because of that, we had to develop new and enhance our communicable disease systems. We put new systems into hospital emergency departments for syndromic surveillance. We put new systems into our drop-in clinic service that we have across London. And so all of those helped us do the games better, but all of them are still in place and are part of the routine system for public health in the UK now as that legacy. We also looked at microbiology services because one of the things we realized, and has become evident again in Pyeongchang in the last week or so, is that the speed with which we diagnose things normally is not sufficient for the needs of the games. Not because the health need has changed, but because the political need has changed, the media need has changed. Whereas if I had a small outbreak of food poisoning in London normally, I might not particularly worry about what exact bacteria or virus caused it, because the answer in public health terms is the same anyway. But in political terms, in media terms, to stand up and say, I don't know what's causing this diarrhea and vomiting in the village is not acceptable. So we put in place new microbiology systems, multiplex PCR, to provide rapid diagnosis for gastrointestinal and respiratory illnesses across the major hospitals in London and then out across the country. And again, all of those systems are still in place. One of the major challenges is making sure you understand how this system will work in an emergency. And to do that, we put in place a range of exercises, roughly 2 major exercises each year for the 3 to 4 years before the games. And we tested how our systems would work. And again, while we were doing that, in 2009, the pandemic came along, and we were able to use some of the thinking that we had for the Olympic Games to help us manage the pandemic. And later, other events that happened in London, we could use those tested response systems to improve the way in which we manage it. On the healthcare side, we have revised and tested hospital systems, because again, we had extensive exercise testing for major emergencies, major outbreaks, major explosions, terrorist attacks, all tested and rehearsed through the system, and that gives us confidence that our system can cope with the threats that London faces all the time. As part of building the Olympic Village, you build in every Games a polyclinic, which is where the athletes get their healthcare. That includes a whole range of high-tech equipment. Often those polyclinics are dismantled at the end of the Games, but in the case of London 2012, the village where the athletes lived was sold off afterwards as community housing to be bought by the public, and the polyclinic became the main community medical centre for that community. And it's still at work today, providing community primary health care to East London. We also developed a National Centre for Sports and Exercise Medicine, which looked not just at the needs of elite athletes, but also looks after people who want to take up exercise and have particular medical issues they want to work through. So it provides a service to bridge between elite athletics and normal recreational activity. In terms of the wider community, the Olympic Park closed down after the Games to be slightly redesigned, reopened in 2014, and some 10 million people have visited as a recreational activity since the reopening. It still has the Olympic Stadium, it has the velodrome where the cycling took place, and you can hire a bicycle cycle around the Olympic Park, and then exchange that bicycle for a racing bike and do a loop around the velodrome track. The Olympic swimming pool is still in place. It hosts major events, but equally the community of East London can go in and for £5 can go and swim in the Olympic pool. I said Athletes Village is now home to 6,000 people, and the whole of the East London regeneration scheme that happened alongside the Games is continuing, and some major institutions, including one of our opera companies, one of our universities, are moving headquarters out to East London to where the Olympic Village was. All of which is creating improved environment, improved employment opportunities for what was a very deprived part of London before. In terms of better health choices, I think I'm on less certain ground because we don't track sufficiently well people's activity to show that it changed during the Games. We can demonstrate sufficient or very, very extensive investment in community sports facilities across London and across the UK, particularly at both also the Paralympic sports. And over 100 community sports facilities, for example, were refurbished as part of the Games because they were used as training venues for different teams visiting. And they reckon about 450,000 Londoners have been using those facilities since the Games. In particular, we saw a very large increase in disability sport after the Games because the Paralympics were so successful. And 36,000 disabled East Londoners now engage in physical activity that they didn't do before. There's also been a very positive community approach. The games makers, the volunteers who helped show people around London, helped them find their way through the transport, helped them in the village and in the park, created an atmosphere where people saw volunteering for the community as a very positive thing, and that has persisted. And London won a title called the European Volunteering Capital in 2016. And indeed, a very large contingent of London Games makers went on to volunteer for the Rio Games and are still volunteering for the next Commonwealth Games and a whole set of issues around London where volunteering has become accepted as a normal practice that people do. And that has generated an improved community spirit. And I think it's part of the message is around don't look very narrowly when you're planning your Games. Look wider at the things that you might do to improve. And part of the messaging around London was not just about the physical activity itself. It was about saying, let's make 2012 a special year for London. So there's a whole range of programs called Games Inspired, which didn't focus necessarily on sport or activity. It focused on saying, London is going to be a good place to be in 2012. Let's make it special, and let's do something special, and let's carry on doing it afterwards. And the last area I want to focus on is just about cross-agency working. A whole range of activities happened that brought together departments of government, of local government, of national government that wouldn't normally get together. And that has persisted. And as part of this Games-inspired movement, where we used 2012 as being a year to do things differently, we brought in programs, for example, in partnership with Sanofi Pasteur, an immunization program for children, saying all children born in 2012 will have a full immunization program as a mark of what the Games achieved. So those community initiatives, again, have contributed to improving the population's health. At national level, we think there was a significant change in the working across government, particularly in how we see the relationship between funding for sport and funding for health. And that, in turn, has helped us work with government to develop strategies for the future. And we're still working through those, and I wouldn't claim they're all yet successful, but certainly our ability to engage with government, for example, on obesity, has been improved by the fact that public health was a key player in delivering an effective Games. The relationships that we've built up across government in the Cabinet Office, the Ministry of Transport, allows us to talk about healthy cities, about transport, about shifting people from using cars to walking, in a way that wouldn't really have been possible or would have taken much longer without the initiative that came from the Games. And it goes back to this issue that because the Games were so important to the Prime Minister and to the government at the time, those who contributed can see benefits in their relationships now. So my answer to the question, is it worth it? I would say yes, it is. But you have to be clear about what it is you want. If you simply look narrowly and say, can I be sure that my games will be healthy, will be safe, and athletes will get the right care, that's one stage. If you want to look more broadly and say, what can I do? How can I change attitudes? How can I improve the way I work across government? How can I improve the way the community thinks about health and about sport? And I think that is the big challenge to get. It can be done, but if you don't sit and plan for it now, it will not happen. So my message to you in closing is, first of all, arigato, thank you for having me here, and good luck for your games in 2020. The person who ran the public health services for the Athens game in 2004 told me once, by the time you get to your game starting, you will hate them. Once they start, you will love them. And once they're over, you will look back and say, it's the best thing I ever did. So good luck for Tokyo and enjoy the aftermath.
マクロスキー英勲爵士、ありがとうございました。Thank you very much.